everyone, and welcome to our Wellbeing Blueprint event. Please let us know you're here by checking into the chat with your name and if you choose your preferred pronouns. We will be recording tonight's session, as you can see, and we also have sign language interpreters for those who need them, so they will be on the screen. We will be taking questions through the chat box, so please feel free to upload your questions. And we will be answering those questions, or our panelists will answer those questions as we move through the presentation and the dialogue. Tonight's event is titled The Power of the Native Vote, Mobilizing Indigenous Communities to Advance Structural Change. I'm so happy you all have joined us. My name is Natalie Williams, and I am the director of the Wellbeing Blueprint. The Wellbeing Blueprint is a roadmap for building a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. The blueprint is supported by a robust community of nearly 200 organizations, community leaders, and individuals that have signed on to change our systems and are working diligently across sectors and issue areas to steer our country towards equity, well-being, and justice. When we speak of well-being, our focus is on reimagining an American systems that are fundamentally unfair and have racism, sexism, homophobia, and other oppressions baked into them. The structural change we desire goes deeper than changing the individuals who work in these systems. We are focused on changing the systems themselves. We have to start with the people and communities to architect these changes by centering on what every person needs to thrive. Tonight, it is my pleasure that we are lifting up the Wellbeing Blueprint Principle 1.3.1, which is recognizing and supporting people's right and ability to vote without shame and without undue hardship. This is an access point to well-being. Barriers to voting acts as a systemic disenfranchisement that threatens anti-poverty movements and anti-racist work at the personal, community, and policy levels. I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight, Natalie Stites, who is an organizer and social entrepreneur. And that's the big words, but she's an amazing leader. She is the first Native American woman to run for Rapid City Mayor. She founded the Hep Sapa Voter Initiative, a civic engagement effort for urban Indians in South Dakota. She's also co-founder of the grassroots community response now known as Wotakaya Mutual Aid Society. Ms. Stites is a UCLA graduate in history and American Indian studies, and she received her Juris Doctorate from UCLA Law. In October, she was recognized by her alma mater for her work for Indigenous peoples and social justice as part of her UCLA Centennial Initiative, and is one of the 25 women of UCLA recognized by Berkeley's celebration of 150 years of women. She is married with one child and lives in the beautiful sacred Black Hills. Thank you, Natalie, and I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our panel and get us started.
Thank you so much, Natalie Williams, for collaborating with us on this event. Thank you for that great introduction. Before I fully introduce our panel, who I'm so grateful to have today, and who I want to make sure get the time that they need to have this important and profound discussion for us as Indigenous peoples in South Dakota and throughout the United States. I've asked one of our panelists, Faith Spotted Eagle, who's also a Tui, an auntie of mine, and she may not know it, but I consider her a mentor and a role model for much of the work that we do here in South Dakota and for our tribal communities. I've asked her to provide some words of encouragement or wochekie, some words of teachings or prayer to open us up in a good way. And after that, I will introduce the rest of our panel. Tui?
Yes, thank you, Toja. On this beautiful red day, this Ampetuduta, the feel of summer, rain, the blessing of rain, Magaju, and that wonderful Hanwi dancing in the sky the other night. That was just a major, that made my heart dance around. So I want to acknowledge every time they say land acknowledgement or prayers, I always get really self-conscious because I know the ancestors are listening. And so I think that all of you, being younger than me, represent the future. And so that gives me excitement to my heart that the words that we will share will go on into the future. And you have probably, I'm counting on all of you to live to be 90. So you're going to carry this forward a long way, this wisdom that we're collaborating and pulling together. But I'd like to have you close your eyes and just feel the universe. De ampetuki, you piake rake ampetu duta wanji unyakupi heche. We chozani wo okia ake woksapa wochi tanka hena iwo ongudakapta heched you piake awa unyankapi heched tokatake awa kanja we choichaga pejuta maniki hena makoche you piake awa yankapta ga you piake Dakunashita ed yukteshni he on wochekia wakaga da wichozani tiwahe tioshpaya wakanja unkia nie ena ob he on wochekia wakaga. So I throw those words out to the universe and ask that the ancestors accept our thanks. We stand on their shoulders, all those grandmothers, those grandfathers, those children, those that have recently departed to experience the great mystery. We ask that they journey well and that we let them know that we will never forget them. And today we enjoy this beautiful wetu day, this spring, summer. And it feels good, it feels invigorating, feels like new knowledge. And we acknowledge all the land that across that represent where our voices come from. The Hesapa, the Mani Lakpa, the Minishoshe, the Abdaya, the plains, the He, the mountains, all the way across Turtle Island. We give our voice out today. So hear us and we give you thanks for Wichoni, the life. Wopira, Ichechia, Midakiasi.
Wopila Tanka. I want to share a little bit about my Tuwing. She is a 73-year-old Dakota elder from the Ihangtawa band of the Ocheti Shakowin. She is coordinator of the Braveheart Society, a traditional Dakota society. As a fluent speaker of her language, she received her cultural education from her grandparents and her father. She has an MA in counseling and guidance from the University of South Dakota and has been a school principal, a teacher, a counselor, and a manager of numerous projects, as well as a organizational trainer and peacemaker, mediator. She has 2 children and 3 Takoja grandchildren, and she's the only Native American to receive an electoral vote for President of the United States in 2016. She lives on the Yankton Reservation, Ihangtawa Oyate of the Ocheti Shakowin, and she has defended water all of her life after losing her community to the Fort Randall Dam. She has fought and won against the KXL pipeline and has also stood strong against the Dakota Access Pipeline by being the chair of the Ihangtawa Treaty Committee and leader of water projects, including Mini Wizipa Waka, as well as leading the signing of water treaties across international lines and borders. Thank you so much, Tuwing, for being with us here today.
Thank you, Tosha.
And next, I would like to introduce Red Dawn Foster, who is an Oglala Lakota born for the Diné Towering House clan. She currently serves as the Assistant Democratic Leader in South Dakota, as a South Dakota State Senator for District 27. She was first elected in November 2018 and has served 2 terms with the spirit of indigenizing state politics. She's a member and assigned to numerous influential legislative committees that often tribal interests and Native interests are at the table. Senator Foster graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Colorado, Denver, and has an MBA from the University of Notre Dame. Senator Foster is a strong proponent of business education and financial literacy for all students and sits on the Lakota Fund's Community Development Financial Institution Board of Directors since 2013. She's the founder of Regeneration Innovation, a nonprofit with the mission of empowering and uplifting young Indigenous entrepreneurs and visionaries through emerging technologies, wellness, and storytelling. Welcome, Senator Foster.
So much
Next,
for that
yay.
introduction.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I would like to introduce Representative Peri Pourier. She is a South Dakota lawmaker representing District 27 in the State House of Representatives. As an Oglala Lakota living on the Pine Ridge Reservation, she is a decorated Navy veteran whose intelligence work was highly valued towards the United States military, hearts and minds operations in Southern Afghanistan. She has garnered numerous commendations in her 8 years as an intelligence analyst, providing vital insight into complex socio-cultural issues that have impacted the field of conflict and delivering critical, quote, ground truth to decision makers. Since her return to civilian life in South Dakota, Representative Pourier has co-founded a nonprofit to help meet essential needs during emergencies on Pine Ridge and created a national mothers to mothers network that assists economically challenged young mothers and infants. She led the Oglala Sioux Tribe's background investigation and adjudication program for 6 years before launching her own small business. Her cross-cultural, personal, and professional experience makes Representative Pourier uniquely situated to the work of bridging the gap between Native and non-Native stakeholders to foster clearer understanding and craft actionable, data-informed solutions that will better inform the lives of all South Dakotans, regardless of descent or tribe. Representative Pourier has championed the establishment of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Liaison Office under the South Dakota Attorney General's Office, the first of its kind in the United States. Representative Pourier is currently serving her second term in the state legislature. I'd like to welcome her, acknowledge her service to the United States as a military veteran that continues in serving all of us in the state legislature. Thank you so much, Representative Pourier, for being here this evening.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
And lastly, and certainly not least, is Bashke Candi Brings Plenty. Wakia Tuwampi Uyampa We. Definitely. Miss Brings Plenty is of the Oglala Lakota tribe, is the Indigenous Justice Court organizer for the American Civil Liberties Union of South Dakota. Candi, who identifies as two-spirit and non-binary, works to build public education and advocacy programs through coalition building, leadership development, communication, and lobbying. They are also a Lakota cultural practitioner and work towards empowerment and visibility of two-spirit warriors so that they may reclaim their walk of life in the sacred circle. Candi earned their BA degree in Native American Studies with an emphasis on tribal laws and treaties, as well as a graduate certificate in public and nonprofit management, and pursued a master's degree in public administration from Portland State University. Welcome, Mashke Candi, and thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Again, welcome and thank you for participating tonight. I am really in awe because I see all of the women here and the two-spirit women here on our panel as role models for all of us as Indigenous women here in South Dakota and throughout Indian country. And I haven't really ever read your resumes or bios, and I'm just so impressed and even in more esteem for all of you and grateful for your participation tonight to share your words of wisdom and encouragement for all of us here. When we conceived of this webinar here to start this discussion of Native voting rights in Indian country, and specifically emphasizing our state of South Dakota, I recall that in the year 2000, the Native vote was critical to the electoral wins by Democratic legislators, including the United States Senate race where Tim Johnson prevailed. We have a largely Republican and independent representation among registered voters, with the smallest number going to registered Democrats here in the state. We are looking to increase Native participation in elections as voters and as candidates. And we are looking to put first and foremost our interests as Indigenous people who frankly are facing a number of crises, including access to resources, the racial wealth gap, educational opportunities, and the impacts of mass incarceration on our community throughout South Dakota. We hope to discuss opportunities for collective action through this panel. And I want to welcome everyone to have a frank discussion, maybe like we're out around our kitchen tables discussing how to get our relatives to vote, and also what we want to share with the many allies, the curious, and perhaps even our opponents out there in the world in terms of political interest, political struggle, and political organizing. And I wanted to open up the panel with a very simple question. And it's one that often plagues me in the civic engagement work that I've been involved in, and also even in terms of on the ground organizing and trying to get more voters registered and participating. And my question is, and that I often ask, and I ask myself, is why should people vote? Why should we vote? Just the very simple. And I'll open it up to whoever would like to take the first attempt here.
I would like to respond to that, Toja. 2 years ago, when I ran for District 21, and also following that, well, it's been 3 years, and after following the Native vote efforts that we did 2 years ago, I was really amazed at the response from the young voters, the first-time voters. I think we have made a big assumption. We almost have disassociated from teaching them, because we had a number of first-time voters that had just turned of age, and they were so excited about going to vote. They don't have the baggage, as much baggage as we do about the historical trauma. They know it, and they're willing to learn about it. But to them, once we explained why it was important, they'd say, oh, cool, let me go get my cousin, or let me go get my brother. And what about my auntie? So that relationality just kicks in automatically once you can ignite the fire of the takojas, the young ones. But I remember one that had signed up for the military, and he said, this is the first time, he said, take my picture. He said, I'm not only going to be a voter, but I'm going to be a soldier. And so we had a poster made of him. But I think the biggest teaching for me about that was that these young people just don't know. And the excitement that they gave me running the trucks around, the vehicles, picking up the grandmas, it was like going to the powwow. And so once we Indianized it and gave it a flavor, then they understood it. So that's what I would say. And that was a big learning from the young people for me.
Wopila, thank you, Tui. Candi, did it look like you were going off mute?
Yes. So, you know, I get a lot of folks that I work with who they want to initiate, or they even ask why what is the obstacle for Indigenous people to vote, for Native American people to vote? And, this question seems very broad, but I'm speaking from my perspective and the work that I've done. Even working with the ACLU, I feel like there's just so many points of historical trauma, exactly what Tui Faith was talking about, because, I can go from, even within my own family, the spectrum of generations and first-time voters like my daughter and her boyfriend, and then, even up to my mother who is in her 70s, and hearing the different perspectives, and Tui, laid it out and defined it very clearly for the way it is in my home as well. The 18-year-olds are super excited to vote for the first time, and they understand the impact of their vote. Whereas, I've asked my mom, how come she hasn't voted in, almost a decade, and I've been pushing her. And this last time I literally went with her, and she had said, she told me that the pollers who were, some elder Washichiweas, some older white ladies who seemed as if they were, expressing their racism very publicly and treating, these elder women and making them feel uncomfortable and unwanted. And, and I did call it out, and I did, write an email, and, just something similar, simple as being not greeted and, being shown that they're unwanted at these polls makes a humongous difference. And my mom was just like, I don't need to give my energy or time to fight for my vote. And I was like, well, I will fight for your vote, because our voices, each and every person has a voice in their vote. And so, for me, it was also about explaining to my non-Native colleagues that there is this, I don't know if it's an unspoken barrier or if it's just intergenerational trauma barrier, but also, the actual obstacles to get to the polling stations, even on our reservations. And, even just having our tribal and our state and federal polls being at two separate areas, some people have to make the choice. Am I going to vote on a state level, or am I going to vote at the tribal level? And they don't have the gas money, or they don't have a vehicle, so they're riding with someone else. And there's just so many obstacles to that. But, I really want to emphasize that it's not a matter of not wanting to vote often. It's just there's so many obstacles that, non-Native people have ever encountered. And so, I just want to encourage and put that voice down that, we need to just keep pushing forward and trying and listening to the needs and wants of those who are trying to vote. And why is it important? There's just so many reasons across the board. And I have a lot of relatives who say, I don't do politics, or I don't get involved in politics. And I tell them, well, you might not be doing politics, but politics are doing you.
That's right, Mashke. That's correct. Senator, would you like to chime in here, or Representative Pourier? We'd love to hear your thoughts on why should people vote, and why do you vote, and also in your case run for office and take that even bigger step.
I could chime in here. I know when you're calling in, you got to press a couple buttons to unmute yourself. So I'll give Senator Red Dawn a minute to get those buttons ready. But, when we ran in 2018, we did our campaign, and it was protect our sovereignty, register to vote, get out the vote. It was an extension of our sovereignty as tribal nations. But now we're in 2022, and I feel like we need to start modifying it as not only protecting our sovereignty, but strengthening our sovereignty, exercising our sovereignty. It's only as good as much as we use it. So that's one reason. And I'm sitting here and I'm learning from our elder faith, our Mashke Candi, and I'm sitting here taking notes because this is a wonderful opportunity to get different different insights from different leaders in different areas of the state. So I'm sitting here taking notes, and I really appreciate being in this position to listen and learn. The other part of it is, we're unique citizens. There's not another citizen in this United States that are tribal citizens, that are state citizens, that are US citizens. We have a unique position within the United States that's not afforded to any other demographic. We're not just another race. We are citizens of nations. And the more that we can exercise our influence and we can exercise our power, the more that we can shape our future. The other part of it is shaping our future. You look at the state of South Dakota and you think of who are the major people who are influencing the future. Whoever can influence policy can influence the future. And you can look at our governor as very much shaping the future of South Dakota. And whenever there's one large voice, there's a domination. So whenever we come together as tribal nations and decide that we're going to be loud, we're not only going to march, we're not only going to protest, but we're going to show up at the polls. We're going to put our own people in office. Then we're going to start shaping policy. We're going to start being those decision makers who can be at the table and be that point, that tipping point. That's one of them. And a lot of times I will quote Senator Reddon. I mean, we have long conversations on the phone, and we always talk about different ways to strategize as how do we get our people to utilize their power, to realize their power. And one of them is, a lot of people say, I don't vote. We hear it every day when we try to talk to people, when we try to get, different initiatives and petition signatures, we hear it all the time, I don't vote. But your landlord votes, your people in leadership everywhere that you see, they vote, your sheriff votes, your mayor votes. You better believe your tribal council reps are voting. So we have to take an interest, and I know it's hard. Candi said, we have a lot of challenges. We do. How do you have conversations? And I guess I don't want to jump forward, but in the later subject, when our people are struggling with survival needs, food, safety, security, it's kind of hard. How do you bring up, you need to register to vote, you really need to learn about these issues? Well, I'm trying to put food on the table. It's really a hard discussion. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderfully said, Representative Peri. I'd like to add that the native vote is we're the direct result.
You're cutting out, Senator Foster, right now, and we can't hear you. I will get back to you with this question as soon as you can get audio back. But thank you. Thank you, Representative Pourier. I really pulled out those words of wisdom that it's not just a defensive measure, but it's an offensive measure. It is an exercise of our sovereignty, not merely to protect it, but to enhance it and to acquire power and influence in this process that is shaping all of our futures, our collective future, and the futures of our children and our families. Now, we've already sort of discussed some of the barriers, but before we get into the barriers to voting, I would like to hear, and Chewy Faith spoke to this as well as Candi and Peri, is what are some of the biggest innovations that you're seeing in voting rights activism, either in our own homelands of the Ochete Shakowin or nationally? What are some of the innovations or inspirations even that you're seeing with voting rights activism right now?
I think for an oldster like myself, like an elder, I am just fascinated with the social media that the young people, the creativity with the memes, the movements, and the absolutely creative way of packaging whatever it is they're targeting. I'm just so fascinated by that. And that's like a whole field within itself. But I think that is so effective. And I just sit back and admire it because I'm not a techie. But we have a lot of people developing in those areas, and I'm very proud of them because that's their job, is to carry that message in a very effective way. But I love watching that. And it helps me understand without having to read these big old long articles or whatever. Although that is important, but I'll just say that much.
Thank you,
One thing I
Tui.
would-
Go ahead.
Sorry. One thing I would like to share, it's in the makings, and we didn't quite catch it in time with last year's process, but with the ACLU, we've been working, the Indigenous Justice Program has been working towards extending the accessibility of registering, because I know like right now people can get registered whenever they go get their driver's license or ID, and people can get registered whenever they go to social services. And one of the components that we've been pushing for and working on, and I feel like this year it's going to happen, is also getting it established within the IHS. So within the Indian Health Services, because every time we go there, we're always updating or filling out paperwork. And one of the components is to require that there is that registration opportunity at each visit. So that way we can reach out to some of the folks who, these canvassers who do go on foot will never reach, because they live out in the districts or because, they're just so isolated in our tribal and rural areas. So that's something really big that I've been working on, and I'm really looking forward to, because I know it will make an impact.
Thank you, Mashke. Please, Representative Pourier, if you'd like to add some comments.
When it comes to innovations and you said inspiration as well. Stacey Abrams is a huge inspiration down in Georgia. All their work that they're doing in Georgia, holy cow. They took 10 years to build it. They literally have an army. They started from the bottom up. I got one of her books. I was going back and forth to Pier. It's a 3-hour drive one way. So I got one of her audiobooks, and I just want to encourage anybody who has long live in a country like we do. We have anywhere we go, it's a long drive, and her audiobook was so inspiring. She talks about being an other in ways that I haven't ever heard anybody talk about another. The inspiration behind they're always sticking together. Our African American brothers and sisters always stick together. They get on the same page, and they have a long history of organizing. But watching them model what they're doing and demonstrating gives me all kinds of hope. The other part of it too is the unification and the empowerment that our two-spirited LGBTQ plus community has. They're less than what, 1-2%, correct me if I have the wrong statistics, but they're a very small part of the United States in the way they have owned their own narrative, and the achievements and the pushing forward and everything that they have done with their cause and their fight to be seen, to be heard. This is how you're going to treat us. So inspirational, incredibly inspirational. So that's what inspires me. That's what I like watching. The other part of it is we have not a lot of people, and I'm still trying to confirm whether Oglala Lakota County has done it, but having open precincts in Indian country, I think is a good thing, which means you could vote anywhere. Here in Oglala Lakota County, you could live 20 minutes away from your voting. And when you're having to deal with gas and car and vehicle and all those challenges, having voting centers, and what voting centers are means you could vote anywhere in a county. You don't have to stick to one precinct. Precincts changes. The lines aren't ever going to be favorable to anybody who lives in rural, areas, especially in Indian country. So having that ability, and I'm still trying to confirm whether or not that was passed by our county commissioners. But I was told it did pass. They did go for voting centers. So that's going to be huge, because you could be on your way to Rapid City and stop by Rocky Ford and vote. So those are some things that I'm watching, and a huge inspiration.
I would like to add another thing. I lived in Portland, Oregon for almost 10 years. And I was just so surprised, and I got so engaged with voting and encouraging other people, because, they have the mail-in ballots. And, I was just so shocked and so surprised how convenient that was. And, and it wasn't even about getting people to vote. It was, creating spaces and places where we would talk about, we got to the next level where we got to talk about the ballot measures and go into detail and educate folks about what they were voting on, because I know when it gets to that level, hearing people, they know what initiative they want to vote for. And then there's all the rest of the things that need to be voted on. And then there's that confusion. Or, sometimes people vote in a way later they realize, oh my goodness, I was in opposition of that. I voted the wrong way. So I just look forward to that day when we can have those type of next level conversations with our Oyate.
I'd like to add something. I feel like after the experience, the 12 years of fighting against KXL, all the relationships that we made within Dakota Rural Action and the farmers, the allies, I feel like there's something there that we need to re-explore, as far as, especially in South Dakota, because there aren't very many of us, but we have some of the common concerns. And one of the common ground concerns is water. And I feel like with this legislation coming up with these water projects, we're in a full-fledged water war right as we speak. And so I think there's some strategy that we need to make in tribal government and reach out to figure out what is the strategy. And you ladies that are in the state legislature, you're more familiar with some of those things that we haven't been exposed to. And what is it that we can center ourselves around? Because we have developed some powerful allies, the organic farmers, the ones who are doing the regenerative stuff. I feel like we could be a voting bloc if we had a common cause with KXL, and it was easy to collaborate on that. But we don't really know what we think of each other in regard to water, because it's a survival need. But I know it's going to impact tribal governments. But I kind of feel like we need to, speaking of policy, I know those votes are going to come up about piping water from our river. And already everybody's vulturing on the river. And so that's a very big concern of mine as an elder, because I don't want my grandchildren ever to want of water. That's a scary thought. And so it's already polluted. And so in our project, we're doing water testing, trying to develop citizen science and develop more of a workforce of environmentalists that can walk in with the cultural knowledge at the same time be scientists in a Western way. But that's my concern. And so if you can think of it anyway with the coming year on how we might consolidate with those allies, I think that's really important not to forget about them. I'm still in touch with them, and we talked about doing a debriefing of KXL fighters. That might be something that we should do, is have a reunion and say, what can we do now with the water? But that's kind of on my mind, and I think it can be done because we don't know what those relationships were so strong and that it worked. So that's what I'd like to kind of recenter. And the second thing I'd like to say, I appreciate you all greeting the kids when they go up to the Capitol, because I think those experiences, maybe with a little bit of tweaking, could really have a experience or an impact on these kids when they go watch the legislator at work. Because I was an intern. I was only like 19 or 20 years old, and I was an intern in McGovern's office in Washington, D.C. And it really made an impact on my life. I would go down and I'd watch the Senate. Sometimes I'd get tired. I'd go to the bathroom and fall asleep. I took some naps in the Senate bathrooms, but it really impacted my life. And so I think when those kids come up there to really explain that when Candi and I talked about that 18-year-old group, they really can make an impact, because just think of our population. They are a force to be reckoned with. I took my grandson up with me one of those days, and him being sensitive to feelings as the young ones are, I took him into the chambers and we looked over the balcony, and he said, "Koshi, I want to get out of here." And I said, "Why?" He said, "There's a chicacabra that lives here." He's probably right. He said, "We have to leave. There's a chicacabra that lives here." But I thought, okay, he's got better sense than I do. So we left. But I just think there's a lot of good learning that could be done in the Capitol. And so it doesn't have to be a fearful place. And it is, and I really admire you girls for, I know I couldn't do that every day, to face the racism and the voting against what we want day after day. I could not handle that. But I send up prayers, because you sit there when they vote down the things that you present. That takes a lot of heart to sit there day after day. I would probably be charged with something if I was up there doing that. So it's probably good I didn't get elected. But thank you. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to leave. My grandchildren are calling. So, but thank you, ladies. And I hope I was able to offer something. And Toja,
Thank you. This
so much.
is right on. Thank you so much for those words. And she is absolutely right. I think that one of the things that we have been working on, Representative Peri Pourier and I are just kind of the initial stages of really doing outreach, starting very young to get our youth informed and engaged with the civic processes, and also familiar and comfortable with the Capitol. One being inviting them, being very welcoming, and two, having a presence in the school, coming down there and just introducing ourselves. And so that they see someone like them at the state Senate, and they sometimes kids will say, "I knew you were important when you came in, but I wasn't sure what exactly, who you were or what you did." And then they thought it was really cool that we have two Oglalas representing our district, which is the first time. One of the things I said that when you couldn't hear me was that Representative Peri Pourier and I, it's so beneficial to have her in the House and me in the Senate, because we really work in tandem, both in the community as well as at the Capitol. And you see that reflected in legislation we're able to get informing and engaging each other with what's coming in that we need to be aware of. But she was the first Native female to hold that spot. And this is the first time you've had two Native females, both in one district. So that's very historic, monumental. And I think that our youth, it's really inspired them. And they'll share stories of, "I want to be a U.S. Senator someday," or "I want to be president." So engaging them while they still see that as an option and normalizing it.
Mm-hmm. Really important.
Thank you, Senator Foster. Thank you, Tui Faith, and the rest of the panelists. Senator, did you want to add something?
I did. I wanted to thank Tui Faith. Also, she and her grandchild children were fundamental in getting the Lakota language, Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota language identified as the official Indigenous language for South Dakota. And when people went, she had her granddaughter there, and they both testified, and she told her story. It changed the outcome of that vote. I think that it was meant to die that day in committee. And after hearing not only Tui Faith's experience as a young child, but also seeing her granddaughter and how this is a multi-generational push, and it was important to us, it completely changed the outcome. And again, having the youth involved in that, to where they came and testified in committee for legislation that ended up passing and was signed into law, was historic and monumental. And I just know that the youth that were involved in that have a special connection to that capital, and they really see themselves represented there now.
Thank you, Senator, for that those comments. And I did want to go back and give you an opportunity if you wanted to speak to the question of why should people vote? Why should we vote?
Well, the fact that you have three Indigenous women represented there, we bring a different worldview. We bring our Indigenous worldview. We're able to inform the citizens of legislation, that law and policy that is potentially going to impact us on a very immediate experience, as well as, like I said, bringing our worldview. And Peri and I, our Representative Pourier and I, are the direct results of over 3,000 Oglala going to the polls through not only a pandemic, but through construction and all these barriers to make sure that their voice was represented and that we were there to be able to advocate for what's important for our community. So the state politics will impact us on a very immediate level, and it doesn't matter if we never leave the reservation. The resources that are funneled through the state will directly impact us. So again, just communicating that and showing what a difference having Indigenous legislators there to bring legislation that's important to us. The NMIW legislation probably would not have happened if we weren't there, as well as informing the citizens and the tribal governments of potential law and policy that will impact them.
Thank you, Senator, for those words. And I think this is a perfect time to segue into the question that we have prepared, which is, what are some of the important policies that are up for vote that impact us as a community, as Indigenous people, as Lakota here in South Dakota, and Dakota and Nakota people, the Ocheti Shakowing. And I just want to say, in our brief conversation so far, we've heard the issues of water, education, youth mentorship, missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples, tribal sovereignty, and the importance of allyship and building coalitions in order to achieve our political objectives. I'd like if any of the panelists or every one of you or a select whoever would like to answer it is, what are the important policies that we need to highlight and that are important to us and should motivate our participation in the political process and elections?
I could start with that one. All that you had mentioned are very important, and as Tui Faith had said, the state is looking at accessing Missouri River water for their economic growth and development. And so we've kind of moved from trying to protect it now and to continuing to protect it, but to make sure that people aren't claiming ownership to it, and that our people will have access. So there's going to be a big push on amplifying our water usage. And then another really important topic that during this COVID recovery, the ARPA funds are coming into the state, and they are in the hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars, and that will really determine where we're going to go into the roads and the infrastructure, and then creating opportunities for affordable housing. So all of those will directly impact Native people, and I would say disproportionately impact them, because if we do not have affordable housing, right now we already have a housing shortage, but we have one of the lowest per capita incomes in the state. And so if the housing increases and the rent's going up, if we don't ensure that there's housing to afford, then it's going to make our social economic system even worse.
Thank you, Senator. Would Candi or Peri like to add to that?
Well, I definitely just want to put a plug in there. We're talking about important policies that are up for vote that might impact Indigenous people. I just really feel like, there's always that need for across the board, regardless of communities or Indigenous or non-Indigenous, but voter access definitely, and our voter rights, because there's a lot of little tiny policies or even just amendments that get put through that we don't realize how big they impact us until they impact us. But also, right now we're in this the Supreme Court's obstacle of a lifetime with Roe versus Wade. And that's, goes back to accessible healthcare. And so we know there's, big decisions that are going to be coming this summer. And then also, what is that going to look like further for each individual state? And what does that policy look like? And it's not just policy for Indian country, but, it's also, policing our bodies and our healthcare. And, that's just going to light a fire on me. So I'm just going to stop there. But yes, I just wanted to put a plug in for those.
I was getting fired too.
I can add a little bit of insight on what if, depending on what happens at the Supreme Court, South Dakota has trigger laws in place to where if Roe v. Wade is overturned, we already have laws and policies ready, like they're called trigger laws, that if that is overturned, that this will automatically change what the access in the state and implement a very strict policy, because right now Roe v. Wade, even though its access is very limited in the state, it will be, those trigger laws will completely eliminate it. So I think that it is important to watch that. That said, I think that it's also an opportunity for the tribes to exert their tribal sovereignty and to really look at a comprehensive, holistic health for women and really step up for that, because it's needed. I'll just leave it at that. It's very needed, and I think that regardless of that, what happens at the Supreme Court level, that the tribes start stepping into where they're offering more comprehensive services to our women.
I can add into the discussion, Natalie. We talked about women and their bodies. The other part the other side of the coin, when we talk about accessible healthcare, right now there's an initiative that is trying to expand Medicare in the state, and Medicaid, sorry. And there is an initiative right now to stop that. So right now, during the primaries, there's a question on the ballot, yes or no to Amendment C. You can go to your polls right now and vote yes or no. I am recommending everyone, Senator Redon is to vote no on Amendment C. And what Amendment C is, it's an amendment to the Constitution that gets rid of majority rule and pushes the threshold higher to 2/3. So the Constitution has never been changed in this part of the Constitution. For hundreds of years, the state of South Dakota has said majority rules, the people rule. The voice of the people prevail, and this amendment is a direct attack on healthcare accessibility, because if you make the threshold higher, 2/3, then you're going to make it harder for Medicaid expansion, for access to healthcare. We have a section in our workforce where you make too much money to be on Medicaid. You make too much money for any government assistance, and then you're automatically responsible for insurance, health insurance for all your children, rent, full everything. So like the burden is on that certain populace. So this expanding Medicaid would give greater access for working people, people who need it. And as much as there is a lot of marketing campaigns that say South Dakota is great for the workforce, we're actually very hard on our workforce. It's very stressful. It's very hard to be in that middle ground where, you know, you make too much money, but your money is all spent on everything that you need. So there, all the other benefits, and I want to say there was a chat in here. I'm so sorry. Yes, cannabis. Allison Renville, who's on the chat. Cannabis was another example of how the government doesn't hold up the will of the people. But I want to say something to that. There's questions all the time is, why would we vote if the government just overrules? Well, think about it. The people who are in power got there because only a certain population voted for them. That certain population, they don't want cannabis. So they could get away with overturning the people's vote because their constituents, the people who put them in power, aren't voting for cannabis. The people who voted for cannabis only showed up to the polls to vote for cannabis. They didn't vote for anybody else. Majority, I'm not saying everybody, but a majority. So they want to disenfranchise you. They want you to lose hope in a system that was made for your voice. So you won't come to the polls. If they overturn it, then you have to vote again. Who's going to get mad and not vote again? Well, they're not going to honor my voice anyway, so why even vote? Well, that's exactly what they want. They don't want everyone to vote, because if everyone voted, this government would look totally different. It would be reflectant of the people of South Dakota. And right now, South Dakota is only for a select few. And I'm getting fired up just like Candi could get fired up. So I'll stop right there.
My head and my hands start waving. I'm talking away, but on mute here to affirm and to elevate what you have to say, because you know, one, I in response, I just want to frame or provide this knowledge is, and Representative Pourier mentioned it, is that South Dakota has some of the least safe workplaces and very bad on workplace safety compared to other states, and especially for our lower wage workers here in South Dakota. And recently, I too offended, insulted, and motivated by the draft opinion that was leaked from the Supreme Court. I recently joined a reproductive justice organization on their board of directors, the Justice Empowerment Fund. And when I was briefed by their staff person on, you know, what's going on in South Dakota, she shared that during COVID, that the one abortion provider in South Dakota was unable to provide abortions. And so she felt that they already had a dry run without Roe v. Wade in place here in South Dakota. And I thought, wow, that's just a lot more frightening than I thought it was here in South Dakota. I wanted to give an opportunity to see if there are any questions in the chat. Natalie, if you wanted to
Yeah, there's one
read some of
question.
those.
Sure, there's one question, which is really surrounding a strategy for voter education. So for people to realize the importance of their vote and understand how it affects their lives, what is a strategy that you're seeing around voter education? And I'll just pose that to anybody on the panel.
So this is right, that was Senator Foster. I had I slightly addressed earlier, is just working with our younger school systems, starting as young as first and second graders, of just introducing ourselves and letting them know who we are, and then having another touch point in middle school. And then again in high school, we have a PAGE program that offers a 2-week intern district. We had the first page that we in history this past session, and so we look at it as kind of our long-term plan of doing that outreach and informing the youth about that they are state citizens as well, and what that process looks like. And with middle school, what we're working on is a curriculum. The first part of it was that democracy is Indigenous, and then talking about how the Indigenous forms of government influenced our modern day democracy, and then going into what does the state, how to bring a bill. You know, maybe some of the older people joining may remember it was called I'm Just a Bill cartoon, but kind of using that as a model to introduce to young people what our system looks like and how to bring a bill and what steps it goes through in order for it to get signed. And then the last part is the federal government and how those kind of interact, and what sovereignties the federal government holds, the state government as well as tribal government, and how they all interact. And then so that's kind of like a long-term getting our youth informed, engaged, as well as then just having the push of informing them what is going on at the Senate or at the legislature during session, and then just making touch points. I know that we are working on getting some billboards up on our reservation, and we're hoping seeing something will also influence of like, oh, okay, this is coming on, or being on the radio, just looking at different ways to inform the community. But we really do have to do the long-term work of creating that foundation of our youth being aware of what's going on at the state, and that's one of our civic duties.
Thank you. I have another question. What role does local government, including mayors, play in mobilizing Indigenous communities to advance structural change?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I couldn't hear that. I'm not sure if everyone else could hear what your question was.
So my question is, what role does local government, including mayors, play in mobilizing Indigenous communities to advance structural change?
I think the major, if I could chime in, I don't know if I know earlier me and Candi were looking at each other to see who would take off mute first. We're being so polite, like, you go first, Mushke. No, you go first. But I'll just chime in real quick. Local government, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you're on the reservation, local government looks a little bit different than it does in the city. But access to voter polls and information out there. I haven't seen any advertisement that we're now voting centers here on the reservation. I don't even think anybody knows. And so knowing what's important to get out. The burden goes on a few who actually know. And so having good information systems in place, the information structure to how do we inform the public, that is so needed in tribal communities in rural areas like here in Pine Ridge. It's huge. You're always needing to inform the public of something, and not everybody's on social media. Not everybody has access to internet. And Keeley Radio, sometimes they're a little particular, especially during campaign season. They got to let every candidate have a spot on the radio due to FCC regulations. So sometimes, it's very difficult to inform so if you have problems informing the public, then you have problems with voter education. So that, I think, having the information structure, the communication structure to get things out is so needed. I think that's a huge, from where I'm at anyways.
Thank you so much. One connection that I wanted to make, just to draw, because I know there's so many communities that don't have a tie or don't have relationships with Indigenous communities or tribal nations, is that the power of the Native vote. And you said it best when you said, look what Stacey Abrams has done in Georgia and the power of the Black vote mobilizing. What fascinated me most about that comment is we in the Black community don't always see it as super powerful, mobilizing collectively. But what's even bigger than that is the power in all of us collectively mobilizing for one another. And so this call to action that we've really played with a little bit on this, and Natalie and I have really talked about, which is how do we support, as all people who are committed to voting rights and freedom and a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being, how do we support one another's communities in tackling voting barriers and advancing voting rights for people? So can I just ask you all for a call to action for people outside of South Dakota, outside of your communities, within your communities? What can we do to help ensure voting rights moving forward for Native and Indigenous communities and for all of us in that like?
First of all, for me, I feel like a call to action beyond just our reach and our experience here in South Dakota is, get yourself familiar with your tribal nations in your own states and start advocating, across the board on what are those obstacles, and just bring awareness and attention to that, along with even just working within, as Natalie was saying, she recently joined a board of directors for reproductive rights. Invite some of these Indigenous people that you may know, or, reach out, because it's, you're not creating that diversity or that voice when these discussions are being made about policies are in need of representation that represents your state. If you're leaving out your tribal nations, then it's not a full impact. And, for me, I feel like, first of all, definitely get to know your tribal nations, reach out and make those relationships with those people in positions of, impact. And then also, invite people and create that space or make that space, because I witnessed a lot of times, a lot of these policies and bills get put together and the intention is never for tribal nations or Indigenous people or the marginalized communities.
I can chime in on that one as well. Just to emphasize Mashke Candi's perspective on this is when you turn on TV, when you turn on CNN, when you turn on any news outlets, the main theme and the main issues that you hear are Black community issues or Mexican community issues, or Hispanic community issues and the challenges that they face. And then you have a box for other, and Natives fall in that. I was so kind of like proud of MSNBC when they came to the reservation and did a segment on the pandemic of how they kind of focus it in. They got the words right. They got the terminology right. They were respectful. They were close to the reservation. They didn't come on the reservation. They dealt with that so greatly, but it's so rare. It's so rare that you get to hear a challenge from the Native community. And really, I used to, when I was growing up, I used to say, well, that's because we're so small. We're less than 1% of the population. And, when I was younger, I used to try to understand it. But now, 2022, this day and age, so many minorities has changed the game. The landscape isn't the same anymore. And we have so much common ground. I know when an issue happens in the Black community, Indian country shows out and they show their sympathy, and they come out and they say, your fight is our fight. We get you, we feel you. And oftentimes when something happens in the Native community, I don't see much support from the Black community. And I'm saying that with all respect and love. It's just something that I see. The other part of it is we have so much in common. We had a trans lady a trans person who was interning at the legislature. And we were at a meeting and she gave a speech and she talked about how she was getting ready to move out of South Dakota because she was no longer welcomed, because the policies that South Dakota has chosen to embrace and be loud and proud about made her unwelcome in her own home. And I looked at her and I wanted to hug her and I cried. The reason why is because it's exactly what the Native community is feeling here in South Dakota. It's not cool to be Native in South Dakota. It's not cool to be Indigenous. They are loud and proud to have erasure policies. They're loud and proud to say, we're changing South Dakota. It's not going to be about race. We're erasing your identities. And this is what it's going to look like. And if you don't like it, you can leave. The anger that fuels when you're talking about an Indigenous community, Indigenous people who have been here since the beginning of time, you're going to change my home. And the same language that the trans woman who said, this is my home, is the same language that Natives say, I am not leaving, this is my home. So you can try all these different ways to change these policies and shape, but we're here and we're not leaving. Why in the heck would I leave my own home? And so that kind of feeling that we're not welcome in our own homelands is something that Brown people face every single day off the reservation lands. Well, even policies on the reservation aren't conducive to a high standard of living. So it's difficult. So we have these areas where we can join forces and that we can empathize. We can say and fight the same thing. And I could say, your fight's my fight. Just as much as they want you to leave, they want us to leave. So, and again, I'm getting fired up again. I apologize. But, what I think, to answer your question, is to elevate our voices. But the other thing is that all these organizations that you see across South Dakota that are trying to do voter initiatives, that are trying to unify voting power blocks, they all need resources. If you have access to resources, it's needed here in South Dakota. Senator Reddown and I, we don't campaign fundraise on our reservation. There's no way in heck am I ever going to ask my own constituents to choose between the light bill and donating to my campaign. So getting the vote out costs money, it costs resources, it costs time, it costs talent. And there are a few people who are doing it who carry the burden. So elevating our voices, helping the doers, the people who show up, expand their network, expand their bases of resources, and just kind of getting it out there is probably the best thing that anybody outside of South Dakota could do to help. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Representative
for that.
Pourier. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Did you want to add to it?
Yes, she is absolutely right. And one thing to really emphasize is that if you look at legislation that's coming to South Dakota, it's not starting in South Dakota, such as the anti-trans bills, as well as the critical race theory bills and other legislation that's coming through. It's starting elsewhere in very conservative states, and then they utilize that, the think tanks, the resources, they're organized. And so that's essentially what everything that Peri said is, we need to become organized. We need to have these coalitions. We need to be able to know who to call, because one of the things is, Natalie's amazing. We will find out legislation in a very, very quick turnaround. And so there's been times I've had to call Natalie at, like Friday evening to say, I just learned about this legislation. It just hit. It's going to come through committee very quickly because it's designed to be able to catch us off guard. And it's going to fly through committee and it's going to be on the floor. Who do you know that's working in this area that can help us with being able to craft a narrative that's a counter narrative to what's coming through, as well as who needs to be informed with this and what have other states done regarding similar legislation. And so organizing, having coalitions, not being like caught off guard when this legislation comes through that we don't know who else is working on similar or working against, opposing similar legislation. So thank you so much again for having this, because I think this is a great first step of identifying that we have very common interests, and South Dakota is steamrolled a lot of times because of lack of resources, and being able to get that and communicate that out and having a wider coalition to be able to support some of the work that we're doing or some of the work that we're trying to oppose.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for joining, and I'm going to hand it to Natalie to give us a final close. I would invite y'all to join in this movement and in support of our Native and Indigenous communities and joining forces. We are focusing the Wellbeing Blueprint for all people, but we're specifically looking at marginalized communities and communities that have significant barriers. I invite y'all to join the Wellbeing Blueprint. Please sign on. This is the beginning of this conversation. We intend to carry it out and figure out ways to collectively mobilize through this. I thank everybody for their time tonight. I specifically thank Natalie for hosting and curating this event. It was beautiful and amazing. And I thank all of our amazing leaders on our panel for your voice and your time. We know time is very valuable and we really appreciate it. And with that, I'll send it to Natalie and then we will close.
Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us here this evening and sharing your words of wisdom and experience. We didn't even get to some of the many issues, but we got to so many issues that impact and that illuminate the power of the Native vote. The power of the Native vote needs to be realized again, and it is being realized state by state, county by county, tribe by tribe. And I'm so pleased to be part of this movement with you all. And I look forward to continuing this conversation and issuing concrete calls of action to continue to move forward, to protect our most vulnerable, and to exercise our sovereignty. Thank you very much. Wopila.
Wopila Taga.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting us to this panel.